Yes. Extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. Moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue. In case you didn't catch my video intro, that is the purpose of this discussion this evening. The question is, are you an extremist? I mean, social media is basically confronting everybody that is slightly out of the mainstream and classifying them as an extremist. As a matter of fact, they're concerned that you might be exposed to violent people. Yet, it seems to me that they weren't at all concerned all last year when we had mostly peaceful protests. Here's the thing. A protest is peaceful. A riot is not. You can have a protest that becomes a riot, but a riot is never a protest, in my opinion. So, when I was thinking on that on my way home today, I came to the conclusion that the reason why they don't like extremism is because it's something outside of their controlled dichotomy, something that is beyond what they're comfortable with. Now, Tom Woods often remarks that his conversations are off the 3x5 card of allowable conversation. You know, and that's a concern. And it's not really that much different or better, even in the Libertarian Party, where they're supposed to be all about principle. So, let me give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. It's interesting that extremism's the problem, yet we really don't have extremism. You know, everybody compromises. And sometimes you need to compromise a little bit to get things done. Sometimes you have to understand that not everybody's going to agree with you, and you have to go along to make things work. That's true. That's life, right? That's politics. You can't always get everything that you want. But if you don't stand for something, you'll stand for nothing. If you allow yourself to not stand for anything, what is the point? So, let me ask you. We have this group that runs around. They have an acronym that everybody's familiar with. They claim that Black Lives Matter. Yet, when you look at their information that they had readily available on their website for a long period of time, they basically don't like men. They are perfectly okay with executing the preborn. It would seem to me that if you were really, truly concerned about those lives, you wouldn't be killing them in the womb. So, as an extremist goes, I'm not impressed. It's kind of weak. Likewise, you know, we talk about the alphabet soup folks that are very concerned about the latest perversion being promoted and protected by government. And I don't even think they necessarily agree amongst themselves, but what's all included under P. And now, well, I'm kind of confused. Because everybody says they're concerned about mental health. Everybody says that if you have mental health issues, you should get help. Unless you believe that being born a male, that you're actually a female. Then, well, rather than getting help with your mental issues, you should just go ahead and start having destructive surgery. You should pretend that you're something you're not, instead of make peace with what you were at birth. Now, again, these people are often painted as extremists, and honestly, with that mindset that we would rather not help people come to peace with what they are, we would rather not get them the help that they obviously need, we're going to mutilate their bodies so that they can pretend they're something they're not. Now, that's pretty jacked up, but I don't know that I would lump that in as an extremist view. I mean, there are the various racial groups, right? That our group's best and we hate everybody else. But really, they're generally a tiny percentage of the population that they represent, and most of the population kind of looks at these people with disdain. Whether there's some Moorish cult out of the Northeast, whether the Black Hebrew Israelites or whatever they call themselves, whether they're the KKK. Nobody really takes these people seriously anymore. But they're really not even extremists because they're a mishmash, warmed up pile of values and virtues that they're signaling to those around them, and they really don't stand for anything. They're really not interested in having a cohesive line of thinking. They're not really interested in doing anything positive. And what they think is positive is really short-sighted, because if they were to actually pull off some of the things they want to do, I don't think they're ready for the consequences. So when I went to go pull up the exact quote, if you will, from Mr. Barry Goldwater, it came up in an article that was put out by some foundation out of D.C., some think tank by a guy by the name of Will Wilkinson. I read part of it. Not really sure that I'm excited about this. Because basically all he keeps telling us is you need to be a bunch of moderates. Well, moderates really never get anything done. They're the ones that ultimately cut the deal. But if there's nobody pushing, if there's nobody to the right or nobody to the left that keeps pushing and pushing and pushing for things, there's nothing that ever changes, right? Now, can you imagine the abolitionist movement over in Great Britain? If he wouldn't have kept pushing and pushing and pushing, Mr. Wilberforce would have never, ever accomplished what his mission was. Indeed, one of the things that's cited in this article is Malcolm X logically connected extremism in the defense of liberty to the idea of black Americans defending their rights by any means necessary. Honestly, I don't have a problem with that. Actually, I've always respected Malcolm X for being honest. Even though I wouldn't necessarily have agreed with what his motivations or what his end goals were, he knew that in his version of liberty, in his version of freedom, in his version of what is best, we need to do it any way we see necessary. And I'm hard-pressed as a middle-aged white guy in the 21st century to look back and not see the value to that thought process. Because if you come to the bargaining table and basically make it clear, nothing's off limits here, U.S. federal government. You're causing problems, and we're prepared to not only die, but to kill for it. That's going to cause people to second guess just how important it is that they keep a thumb on you. Can you imagine if back in 1935 or 1938, if there would have been a strong-willed group of pastors in Germany that partnered with the Jewish folks that weren't smart enough to get the heck out of there when the going was good, if they would have partnered together and just said no, not only no, we're going to defend ourselves, that would have put a huge cost on the early regime they may not have been willing to pay. They would have maybe caused them to second guess. Now, they could have doubled down and they maybe would have eventually won the day, but at what cost? At what cost would you be willing to pay just to get that one thing? I don't know. We'll never know. When we allow for the idea that some things aren't worth fighting for, or some things aren't worth dying for, or some things aren't worth killing for, we sack the whole idea of liberty. We sack the whole idea of virtue and value to individuals. You know, I try really hard to work with other people. I mean, I have plenty of friends and acquaintances that I don't agree with. I mean, it's kind of a natural situation for somebody like me because I am a bit of an extremist. But I'm an extremist in the view that you ought to be able to do what you want to do as long as you're not hurting somebody else or taking their stuff. And I value it enough that I invest the time and energy and money to defend it. So yeah, by the modern definition, that makes me an extremist. But the question really is are you an extremist? Is there something that you're willing to not only fight for, but die for, or potentially kill for? And by kill, I mean in the form of self-defense. Obviously, I am not one to advocate violence, ever. You should never be taking the first strike. In fact, the just war theory would teach that is not the proper way to do things. Never mind how they modified it and created a whole nother justification for what we've been doing for the last 20 years. There really is not a legitimate reason to strike first. Now they're going to give you the imminent danger. Okay, fine, maybe let it get adjudicated out and that's all right, maybe. But if we continue to not fight for anything, to not protect anything, people walking down the street that don't cover their faces become extremists. People that want to go to work without having to get a jab become extremists. People that want to drive down the road without having to be pulled over for no apparent reason so they can, quote, test you for whatever reason becomes an extremist. That bar is already dangerously close to that location right now. And this is going to feed directly into the next couple episodes that I'm going to reference the vision of what the world would be like in Brave New World in 1984. The idea that we're either so checked out that we just don't care about anything, or we're so stomped down that we're not allowed to think about anything. But I guess one of the things that this article talks about is, you know, you have to use good judgment to override your emotional impulse. And I think that's a fair statement. I think that objective thought process, thinking about something beyond just your knee-jerk reaction, your gut instincts, is a good idea. Lord knows if I were to act out on my impulses at times, that could be very bad. But sometimes it's 30 seconds, sometimes it's 5 seconds, sometimes it's 30 minutes. You sit and you think about it. What's the best way to deal with this? What's the most effective way to fight back at this? You have to pause. You have to be objective. You have to come together with what is workable, what do you value most, and then go forward. So, there are a lot of patriots out there, right? And they're concerned that they're going to be lumped in as an extremist. It may be too late already. I would caution you that your unchecked admiration for a piece of cloth that represents your country, your unchecked admiration for a few individuals that may represent you in Washington, D.C. or Austin is a problem. Consider this. January 6th, a couple hundred people trespassed. Were there agent provocateurs there? Yeah, probably. Were there people up to bad things there? Yeah, probably. Was there people that had firearms or weapons there? Yeah. Apparently the FBI can confirm at least one person had a firearm. Did a few people die there? Yes, unfortunately. The odd thing is the guy that they said was killed by the protesters wasn't killed by the protesters, and one of the protesters that died, we still don't know what happened there. Funny how that works, isn't it? Yet, there are large numbers of people that have been rounded up, considered domestic terrorists for trespassing, and are being held under indefinite detention and have not been charged with anything. Now, how does that work? Now, they sold us this bill of goods about 20 years ago that they were only use this on terrorists. They were only going to use it on foreign nationals that come here to do bad things. Yet now, 20 years later, we've got a couple hundred people locked up that are otherwise good American citizens that maybe had a little bit of poor judgment. Maybe some have had malintent. I'll give you that. And, if you sort those people out and you want to prosecute them, fine. But you still have to charge them with something. You don't just get to hold them forever. Yet our same FBI, who's so concerned about, white extremists, did nothing that we saw all last year. They didn't care about any of the other troubles we had, but now we've got the new du jour scare tactic, right? We're past the pandemic. Now we've moved into, evil white men or evil white people. Now, that's not to say that there aren't people that are evil that are white. That's not to say that there aren't plenty of evil people of all designations. But you don't lump people together by the main or the single basis that they are at a location for a short period of time. It just doesn't make sense. This detention that they're under was sold to us as one thing and is now being used as another. Again, this is why I'm an extremist. This is why I have a problem with these things. I distinctly remember 20 years ago that while having a debate on this very subject, while I was at college, there was a number of younger students there because I was significantly older than most of them, and they were telling me how they thought that the Patriot Act was a bad thing. I agreed with them. And then the few, let's call them token Republicans or token conservatives that were present, well, of course, they defended it. Well, we need to have this. We're going to go to war, blah, blah, blah. And I told them, I said, hey, look, I know you guys like George Bush or you trust George Bush. And, I know that you think the conservatives are in charge right now and they're going to actually follow the rules that they're setting up for this. But I got to tell you, what happens when the other guys get in charge? What happens after this law's on the books for a bit? What's to prevent them from using this against everybody else? What's to prevent this from being flipped upon us and ruining people's lives for having an unpopular opinion? There's a big difference between I think something that is quote unquote extremist and I go and do something that is violent. Again, I always advocate nonviolence. Excuse me. I always advocate what Chris Ann Hall would call peaceful noncompliance. Just say no. Just don't do it. When I go to fly, I let them frisk me. Why? Because I don't want to be going through that scanner. It's none of their business. I don't want to comply with that. I never signed on for that. In the country that I went and served, the idea of scanning yourself as a naked person to be able to transport yourself from place A to place B never ever crossed my mind. Yet apparently now that's perfectly okay and everybody just goes along with it. But that's kind of a scary situation. You know, one of the other kind of transition back in time here. This same article references the idea that allegedly McVeigh was wearing a t-shirt that said the Tree of Liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. Yeah, that was a Thomas Jefferson quote. And yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. That's acknowledging a historical fact. That's acknowledging the way the world works. It doesn't mean that you're advocating go killing a bunch of people or killing yourself in the process. No, it's just reminding everybody that you can only put so much tyranny on people before there's a price to be paid. Now, do you really think if, I don't know, 1% of the population were to get tired of any number of the government abuses that were out there and started to do something about it, that wouldn't be a strong, difficult, painful process and consequence of government overreach? I mean, that's roughly 3.3 million people. And if only 10% of them actually knew how to do bad things, right? Blow things up, shoot people. That's still 330,000 people. That's a dangerous situation. I don't think that's something we want to live through. Again, we have the course to fix most of this. We have the ability to rein this in. And when you send people that advocate for quote-unquote extremist views in the defense of liberty, some of this stuff gets dealt with. You don't have to be scared with people that show up with plastique strapped to their chest, with people that go onto planes with weapons. You don't have to be scared about that truck that pulled up outside that building if you're doing the right thing. If you are securing and protecting people's liberty. If you are using that extremism in the defense of liberty. Now, the corollary, right, is the moderation in the pursuit of justice, right? In the defense of justice. Or, I'm sorry, in the pursuit of justice. So, that was a very frustrating thing for me personally. You know, last year, I brought a little bit of flavor to a large meeting, basically telling them there is injustice going on here. Whether or not we recognize it, whether or not we think it's particularly bad in Collin County is irrelevant. It's clearly happening. Now, is some of it quote unquote justifiable? Is some of it maybe bad examples? Yeah, that's all well and good. But it still needed to be addressed. It still is an issue worthy of our time. We can't just dismiss it. We can't moderate it away and ignore it because it makes us uncomfortable. I mean, I got to tell you, a lot of the people that advocate criminal justice reform or various things having to do with that, they make me uncomfortable. They're generally not in agreement with me on a whole lot of other things. But much like the broken clock, they're right this time. And they're right because we have allowed for too long things to go on that have a detrimental effect to people, and we have not prevented it. We have not reined it in. We have not executed proper checks and balances. We have not prevented abuse. And it's not just one group that gets affected by that. Oh, I know there are several groups that are disproportionately affected. You're right. But when you correct for socioeconomic issues, right? How much money that people have, pretty much on par. It's pretty close the same across the board, depending, regardless who your parents are. It's upsetting to me that people that I look at as being allies, people that I look at being in the same team, refuse to have a discussion because the wrong person brought it up. And I'm not saying it was me, that I was the wrong person. I'm saying that the people that predominantly go out on these issues are not on the same team. So rather than acknowledge maybe they have a point, or maybe there's an issue here we could address, they just reject it whole cloth. And I warned them. I said, and you may have heard this before earlier, but I'm putting this together because this is directly related to the idea that you have to be extreme in the defense of liberty. And you should not moderate in the pursuit of justice. Unfortunately, the skew is that justice has many various definitions, and they put various modifiers in front of justice. Food justice, social justice, racial justice, earth justice, all these other things. And quite frankly, the people that would be most interested in helping you with that are put off by that. Now, we all like to poke fun of moderates, right? I mean, I do too. Moderates, they have no spine, they're fluffy, whatever. But the reality is we all need them. We can't get stuff done without them. We need them because they sometimes show us the softer side to our issue. They sometimes help us take that extreme view, translate it into an appropriate application for this issue. So I value the folks that take the time to do that. In fact, I try and make the best decisions and slowing my actions to allow that action to take place. So to allow that interaction to take place. To meet with people that say, yeah, Stephen, you're a little extreme on this issue, but we kind of like the idea that some of this stuff isn't good, that this is kind of abusive. We would go with you on this, or we would agree with you on that. That's how stuff gets done. Now, one of my favorite former state representatives said that he always saw his job as to be the one pushing the Overton window, right? Staking out that extreme view to pull over the discussion. In many ways, that's what I try and do. Most libertarians that I know will say, if we could just get back to constitutional government, I'd be okay with that. That's not what I want, but I'd be okay with that. And as someone that's kind of backed off some of the more hardcore libertarian views I used to hold, just because of reality and age, I get it, because that's where I've moved to. It's like, look, I can do these things. We can make a huge difference in these areas. If I can just set aside these couple things here that, man, guys, I'm just not comfortable with that. I hear you. You got a point. But so at some point, I'm going to be labeled the moderate, right? I might be dead and buried for 50 years before that happens. But hey, it could happen. Worse things have happened. So the idea is, if you're not going to do your all, if you're not willing to put it on the line, you're never going to get what you need. I've often referenced the idea that if you don't show up to a battle, you can't win. Or if you're dependent upon a team that doesn't join you on the field, you can't win. So just because you would be called an extremist should not worry you. Just because you have what some people think are extremist views should not bother you. But you also need to be willing to listen to those that maybe don't agree with you on a lot. But on this issue, we're on the same page at least. And those moderates among us, they may be able to say, hey, man, that's maybe a bit far. But hey, I would agree on this. And I look at it this way. I was really disappointed when the state legislature backed off a true constitutional carry bill. I was really disappointed. But on the flip side is they held the line. They put it through for 21 years old. Now, I've said my piece on that. But by and large, it's so much better than what we had. That's about as close as we could get without changing the age. We got pretty much everything else. Now, whether or not they're going to actually follow through on it, I know the governor signed the bill, so it's law coming in a month here. So that's a case where if there was no extreme view, if there was no extreme push, that would never ever happen. But because we kept pushing and pushing and pushing, the moderates came along and said, hey, you know what? We're not really comfortable with the idea of 18-year-olds, but we'll give you 21. If you'll just back off and give us 21, we can go with that. Now, the sad thing is it took us 10 years to get there. That's just a huge disappointment that the Republic of Texas is afraid of 18-year-old people carrying firearms. But we've remedied most of that issue. And it was only possible because people were defending liberty with an extreme view. So, regardless of what this guy thinks over at the Open Society or whatever the heck their Washington, D.C. think tank is, I stand firm that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. You just got to be smart enough to know when you should take the deal. The art of the deal. Hi, Mr. Donald. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is the episode for tonight. I will see you on the other side.